Munich is the cradle of one of the most powerful totalitarian ideas of the 20th century, which subjugated half of Europe and caused millions of people to suffer. And I know who you're thinking of now. But I'm talking about the other totalitarian ideology of the 20th century. In fact, it can be said that the other great ideology, Marxism-Leninism, was also born in Munich, at least significant parts of it. Lenin lived here in Munich from 1900 to 1902. Of course, there are no magnificent communist buildings here that refer to this, because Lenin ultimately led the revolution in Russia and not in Munich. Also, Munich was never part of the Soviet zone after the Second World War. But there are still one or two buildings in which he lived. Munich was a port of call for many Russian migrants who fled the repressions of the tsarist regime in Russia. The painter Vasily Kandinsky, for example, found a new place to work here. At the same time, Lenin also took up his political activities in Munich, which he had been unable to do in Russia. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin's real name, moved into his first room in Gabelsbergerstraße 51 in summer of 1900. It was also in Munich that he adopted his fighting name Lenin. However, he also used other pseudonyms. His apartment doors always bore the name Meyer. There is hardly a more German name. Ideal as a cover. He didn't stay here for long. After a few days he moved to Kaiserstraße 46, where the social democrat and innkeeper Georg Rittmeier arranged a small room for him. Lenin reported very little about his Munich years. But Lenin's wife, Nadezhda Krupskaya, who moved in with Lenin short afterwards, wrote letters to her relatives.
After I arrived, we moved in with a German working-class family. The family was quite large, consisting of 6 people. They only had a kitchen and a small room. But everywhere was scrupulously clean, the children were very clean and well-behaved. I decided to provide Vladimir Ilyich with home cooking and started cooking myself. I cooked in the landlord's kitchen, but had to prepare everything in our room. I tried to make as little noise as possible, because Vladimir Ilyich was already writing his pamphlet What is to be Done.
Lenin's main work, What is to be Done, was therefore written in Munich. Today, nothing reminds us of Lenin here. A memorial plaque was inaugurated here in 1968, however it was damaged several times and finally dismantled in 1970. Apparently, some people could not be bothered to have a reminder of Lenin during the hottest days of the Cold War. But the room in Kaiserstraße quickly became too small for Lenin and his wife. In 1901, they moved to Schleisamer Straße 106 for a short time. 12 years later, an Austrian postcard painter moved into the same street 2 blocks away. Lenin and Krupskaya moved into their last accommodation in Munich at Siegfriedstraße 19. Nadezhda Krupskaya writes about the apartment.
We are quite well accommodated here. We have our own apartment. The rents here are lower than in such, relatively, large cities in Russia. We bought cheap second-hand furniture to furnish it. It's much easier to manage here. The area is also very nice. We live on the outskirts of the city and there is a park with lots of greenery nearby. The connection to the center is excellent thanks to the electric streetcar.
In general, she praises the city's public services. Some of the comments seem surprisingly up to date.
For example, we have the opportunity to swim every day in a very good bathing establishment at a relatively low price. We can go for walks and it's not far to get out of the city. There is much less traffic here than in a Russian town of the same size. This is because electric streetcars and bicycles have completely replaced horse-drawn carriages. And the traffic of carts is completely insignificant in the suburb where we live. We are satisfied with where we live and have no intention of going to the country or to a summer resort.
Lenin also produced the revolutionary newspaper Iskra, The Spark, in Munich. The editorial team met not far from Lenin's last apartment in Café Noris at Leopoldstraße 41. Today a modern building stands here. The newspaper was printed at Senfelderstraße 4, near the main railway station. Today the Hotel Leonardo is located here in a modern building. If you check in here, remember that this is where the spark for the Russian Revolution was lit. Lenin also spent a lot of time in the Bavarian State Library. Here he read and wrote his pamphlet, What is to be Done. He wrote the name Jordan B. Jordanov in the user book of the journal reading room. Everything Lenin did in Munich was conspirational in order to attract as little attention as possible. Nevertheless, he had to leave Munich in May 1902 after the Bavarian police became increasingly interested in him. So, is Munich also the birthplace of the second great ideology of the 20th century? Well, I admit it's a bit clickbait, but this is where he called himself Lenin for the first time. Without the name, there would be no Marxism-Leninism. But I think it's more important that he wrote what is to be done here. In it, he rejects social democratic reform policies in favor of a revolutionary approach. He argues for discipline, centralism, and a clear political line. In other words, he shows himself to be an anti-democrat and sets the guidelines for the socialist bloc in the second half of the 20th century. His successor implemented these guidelines with the utmost consistency. But Lenin is also responsible for several million deaths, be it through the Red Terror of the Cheka, the Russian Civil War, or starvation deaths due to communist mismanagement. But Munich also has many very beautiful sites and I'd love to show them to you. Here's my homepage and my email address. Until the next video, Philip.